Get to higher ground. The water is rising fast. Move!
They built 55 homes on land that wasn't theirs. My land. They ignored my letters, silenced my warnings, and mocked my claims. And when the bulldozers carved up my soil, the HOA president said to my face, "This community will rise with or without you." But they forgot something. Land has memory, and water never forgets where it's meant to flow. So when the day came, I stood on the ridge, hand on the wheel of the dam's floodgate, watching those homes stand tall in arrogance. And with one motion, I reminded them all who this land really belonged to. What would you have done? Before all of that, before the cameras and the lawsuits and the flood that changed everything, life here seemed calm. My name is David Harper, mid-40s, modest man, someone who never wanted to be the center of attention. My property wasn't a mansion or a sprawling estate. It was a modest farmhouse, 2 stories tucked into the valley. My land stretched wider than most people in the county realized because it bordered the ridge where the old dam had been built decades ago. That dam wasn't just concrete and steel to me. It was history. My father helped maintain it, and his father before him. It wasn't government-owned, it wasn't public property, it was private, mine. The land, the water it held back, the valley below, it had been deeded to my family generations ago. But as time passed, suburbs spread, roads lengthened. What had once been quiet farmland slowly transformed. New homeowners arrived, and with them, the machine of progress, the HOA. They came with shiny brochures, promises of community spirit, and visions of new housing developments. To many, they sounded like opportunity. To me, they sounded like intrusion. At first, it was harmless enough. New fences, sidewalks, a neighborhood watch. But with every new family came new construction, edging closer and closer to my boundary line. I could see it from my porch, rooftops sprouting like weeds. Their laughter carried across the valley, their lights polluting the night I once knew as dark and still. I tried to live with it. I told myself the world changes and you adapt. But then the HOA sent their first letter. It was polite at first, asking me to consider aligning with the community's shared vision by removing my barn. My barn, a structure older than their HOA charter, sitting proudly on my side of the property line. They said it was unsightly. I said it was mine. That was the beginning, a small seed of conflict planted in fertile soil. What I didn't know was just how deep their roots of arrogance would dig.
The letters didn't stop. They multiplied. First about the barn, then about the state of my property. They claimed my unpaved driveway didn't meet community standards. They wanted me to install a fence that matched theirs. They even complained about the color of my home's siding. Never mind that I wasn't part of their HOA, never signed their contracts, never agreed to their rules. I laughed the first time I read their demands, but laughter turned to frustration as the fines started arriving. Envelopes stacked high, each threatening more action, each bolder than the last. I threw them out at first, then I called, then I showed up at one of their board meetings. That's when I met him, Richard Lawson, HOA president. Mid to late 50s, slick gray hair combed back, wireframe glasses perched perfectly on his nose, and a smug smile that never seemed to leave his face. He wore authority like armor, strutting around in his navy blazer and red tie like a king holding court. When I confronted him, he leaned back in his chair and said, Mr. Harper, this community operates under majority rule. You may not like it, but progress doesn't wait for one man. One man. That's all I was to him. An obstacle, an inconvenience, something to bulldoze. I walked out of that meeting with my fists clenched. And days later, the bulldozers came. At first, I thought they were working nearby, expanding the roads, laying new foundations. But then I realized where the trucks were heading. My land, the ridgeline, the valley. 55 homes. They didn't just encroach, they invaded. Without my consent, without my approval, they staked claims on property that belonged to me. I sent letters. They went unanswered. I called lawyers. They told me to prepare for a long, expensive battle. I even called the county, but the HOA had greased the right palms. Permits had been lost. Signatures found. Boundaries adjusted. On paper, it looked legitimate, but I knew the truth. They had stolen it. And every day, I watched as frame after frame rose. Families cheered as they toured their new homes. The HOA president stood proudly at ribbon cuttings, shaking hands, grinning for cameras, his empire expanding on the back of theft. Inside, rage built. I barely slept. I barely ate. Every glance from my porch reminded me of what they had taken. But worse than the theft was the arrogance. Because Richard came to my door one evening. He handed me another letter, smiling as he said, "You should be grateful, David. We've increased the value of this whole area. You'll thank us one day." I slammed the door in his face, and that night I stood at the dam, hand on the wheel, staring at the floodgates, thinking, planning. Could I really do it? Could I really unleash what waited behind those walls? For weeks, I wrestled with the thought, until the day came when a final letter arrived, one that broke me completely. It wasn't about the barn, or the siding, or the driveway. It was an order, an eviction notice, signed by the board, led by Richard Lawson. They weren't just taking the land, they were taking my home. That was the night I made my decision. The sky was gray when I walked the ridge. Clouds heavy, the air damp with the scent of rain. Below me, 55 homes stood neatly arranged, their streets clean, their lawns green. A picture-perfect neighborhood built on lies. I carried the crumpled eviction notice in my pocket, my fingers clenched around it like a talisman of rage. At the dam, the wheel loomed before me, rusted, massive, silent. My hand trembled as I gripped it. Voices echoed in my mind. Richard's smug tone, the lawyer's dismissals, the neighbor's laughter. And then, silence. The silence of decision. I turned the wheel. The groan of metal filled the air as the floodgates creaked open. At first, just a trickle, then a roar. A torrent surged forward, white and furious, tearing through the valley with unstoppable force.
From the ridge, I watched as water swallowed streets. Fences snapped, cars floated, families screamed, scrambling onto rooftops. And at the center of it all, Richard Lawson stood on a porch, shouting orders no one could hear. His navy blazer clinging to him in the rain, his empire drowning before his eyes.
Move!
In that moment, I felt everything at once.
The water is
Rage,
rising fast.
relief,
Move!
fear, power. The homes they built on my land were gone in minutes. And when the floodwaters settled, silence returned. A silence heavier than any storm. The aftermath was chaos. Reporters descended. Lawsuits erupted. The HOA pointed their fingers at me, branding me reckless, dangerous. But as investigations unfolded, the truth surfaced. Forged permits, shady deals, corruption at every level. Richard Lawson became the face of disgrace, his smug smile replaced with a hollow stare as his empire crumbled. Families turned against him, investors abandoned him, and the HOA dissolved under the weight of its own greed. Me? I didn't walk away unscathed. I faced fines, restrictions, endless debates over whether I was a villain or a hero. To some, I was reckless. To others, a hero. But I knew one thing. I had reclaimed what was mine. The land healed. Grass grew again. Birds returned. Nature rebuilt where arrogance had failed. And as I stood once more on the ridge, looking at the quiet dam, I knew its concrete wasn't just stone. It was memory. People across the country heard my story. Homeowners trapped under HOA control began asking questions, pushing back, standing taller. They saw that one man, even against 55 homes, could fight back. That's the legacy. Not the water, not the wreckage, not me. The legacy is this. When power builds on stolen ground, it should never be surprised when the ground itself rises to wash it away. So I ask you, if 55 homes stood on your land, if every plea was silenced, every letter ignored, every right stripped away, what would you have done? Would you have let them take everything? Or would you have opened the floodgates and let justice flow? Because sometimes justice doesn't come in courtrooms. Sometimes it comes in waves. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, make sure you hit subscribe, because the next HOA nightmare might just be wilder than this one. Don't miss it.